1.
All right, so this is very exciting. I am what the young people might be called fangirling at the moment. We have Stephen Frost. This is the head of, I just want to get this right, head of production at Digital Eclipse, who is the dude along with his team that are putting together this most excellent of collections that I have been praying for a long time, the Mortal Kombat Legacy Kollection. So, how you going, man?
Good. I'm excited. Yeah, it's been, it's always a bit both nervous and exciting when any project is revealed to the world, right? After you've been working on it for a bit. But obviously with IPs, large IPs like this or Turtles, right, that we've worked in the past, when they especially come out, you're reaching a much larger audience than we may typically reach with some of our other products, right? And so it's always very interesting to see what people think and how excited they are or what they want to see in it. It's always that anything's possible. It's that honeymoon phase where anything's possible. So we love that and getting the feedback from people. But really, it was a huge moment for the team to have the trailer play at the Sony State of Play. Thanks to Sony for working with us on that. We all gathered in the studio here and watched it live with everyone else. Obviously, at that point, I had seen the trailer 20 billion times because we were editing, right? But to see it run like that and the immediate reaction was kind of amazing. So, thanks to everyone who expressed their positive energy and feedback on that.
Yeah, I was just because I want to hear about all your background and everything in regards to yourself and Digital Eclipse and your history. But I have to say, that's the most Mortal Kombat trailer I have seen in a really long time. From start to finish, the tone, the music, the secrets, the speculation, like I couldn't believe what I was watching. I know on the channel, I have talked for a long time about, somebody needs to bring out these specific collections, like the 2D, then the 3D, and then maybe MK9. And when I was watching it, I'm like, this cannot be happening. I have been talking about this for so long, and you guys did it. You guys actually did it. So, yes. All right. Yeah. So, yeah, give a rundown, man, of yourself and your history and the company and everything.
Well, I won't go too far back. I mean, obviously, I will say that I started in this industry in QA. A lot of people start in QA. I was attending the University of Oregon, and across the street was a studio called Dynamics, which was owned by Sierra at the time, which is known for King's Quest and Police Quest and all of those major franchises. Dynamics did Tribes and some of those games, Red Baron. And so I kind of was well-versed in computers, and I was going to college for computers, and I'm like, why not? I'll get a job working in QA. And it was a great job. It was really, really fun. I kind of launched from that, moving to California to work on the press side of things. It was difficult at that time to get a job again in video games out of state. No one's going to hire you out of state at that point. It's a really weird sort of situation. So I managed to reach out, especially on some of the magazines that I read at the time, like Ultra Game Players, Next Generation magazine, these early kind of key magazines that were talking about video games, and managed to land a job there. Initially as sort of like a webmaster / online editor during the early days, actually forming what would become IGN at that point, because it was Imagine Games Network. So really, one of my last sort of tasks before I transitioned over to the magazine was starting to think about what would eventually become IGN way back then.
Yep.
But I had an opportunity because I was freelancing and writing. Ironically, my first official paid review was for a fighting game. It was for Killer Instinct Gold. for the N64,
Nice.
and I
Yep.
was a big fighting game fan. I've always been a big fighting game fan, and so I really loved that and became sort of a fighting game review guy there. And then they liked my writing. Knock on wood. Thank you for folks who read my writing. And said, "Hey, we're starting up a PlayStation magazine. Do you want to start working on the PlayStation magazine?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's phenomenal. Being able to
Mm.
start up a magazine was cool." And so I did that, and a lot of the people who are Digital Eclipse now that I've sort of re-met up with over these last recent years, I also met for the first time back then during the editorial days. A lot of us originated from that. Mike Micah, the studio head, was working at Next Gen magazine at that time. Our head of biz dev, was working on magazines. A lot of people were working on magazines. So it's kind of a cool thing to have a studio where there's a strong editorial foundation
Yep.
for that.
Mm.
And then, but even though a young kid in my 20s, having a blast writing about games and traveling and hanging with my buds, I really wanted to get back into game development,
Mm.
and then eventually left and worked at EA and then Activision, and then at Sega. I was at Sega for almost a decade, I think a little over 9 years, where I worked on the Marvel titles, Shinobi, Sonic. The last part of my time at
Oh.
Sega was Sonic stuff. Um, and and then I'd still be there, but Sega, I think partially because of the success of Sonic and especially with the
Mm.
licensing and merchandising, decided to move the headquarters down to Southern California to be closer to licensing and LA and
Yep.
movies and stuff like that. And obviously you can see the effects of that now with the Sonic movies and
Yep.
the success that they're having there. But a lot of us who are sort of entrenched in the San Francisco Bay Area wanted to stay. I was one of them. And so I decided after those years of working at big companies like EA and Activision and Sega, I wanted to take a little bit of break and kind of readjust sort of what I wanted to do in the games industry, and had an opportunity to join Digital Eclipse, which was sort of this up and coming. They've been around for a while, but really there was a chance here to make a big impact. They're working on the Street Fighter collection, which they wanted to hire me for. I'm like, hey, that's perfect situation. And again, I knew a lot of these guys from my early editorial days, so it seemed like a sort of a perfect fit. And and have been here ever since for the last 7-8 years, working on a lot of these collections and original games.
Mm.
And it's been a kind of amazing, from my perspective, just to see the growth and how our evolution over the last 7 years ago. I think we were at this point in the industry where we really were debating internally about the importance of more behind the scenes content in our games, and what does that look like, and how do you do that? Because especially since we were getting a lot more involved in emulation games, emulation based games, which we originally started. So back in 92, a factoid for people, back in 92, Digital Eclipse as a brand was actually responsible for some of the first emulated retail titles out there. We had emulated some of the early arcade games like Joust for home computers, specifically
Wow.
like Apple computers and stuff. So way back in 92, we actually released official emulated arcade packages way back then, before emulation was even really a known thing. And it was the
Yeah.
early days of the internet, right? The internet wasn't
Yeah.
where it is now. So emulation was kind of this magical thing. But
Mm.
as we kind of evolved over the years, we got really good at it. Anytime someone was trying to emulate, especially arcade games like X-Men and Turtles or
Yep.
Simpsons, we would be the ones who did that. So especially during that PS3, 360 era, all that stuff, most of the arcade games, single releases from Konami and other companies, were us doing it.
Yep.
And so we just got better and better. But we started to reach a point where it sort of made sense to us that having just the games themselves, while they cater to fans and there's nostalgia hit there, without some sort of context or behind the scenes content, it's hard to grow the audience, to appeal to a broader audience. You basically just have the fans and then that's it. But if you start to talk about the games and how they're made and why they're important, then you start to grab the interest of people who might not have played the games before, because you're sort of giving them the selling point of like, hey, this is why you should be excited about these products.
Yep.
So we started evolving that and starting to include more and more behind the scenes content in our products. The typical stuff like design documents, concept art, things that were on the cutting room floor. And that was sort of working for a while. We were understanding it, and it was making sense, and people were liking it. But then we started thinking like, well, especially now that we have such a growing editorial group of people who work at the studio, being able to tell the story behind the game was becoming more and more important. The assets were great, but without sort of something to connect them together, to explain to people what they're seeing or why they should care, without that, it starts to lose a lot of that context, right? And sort of that attachment. So we really started to integrate more stuff as far as storytelling into the games, such as captions underneath the artwork, trying to tell a sequence of stories. Like with Aladdin, we did an Aladdin and Lion King collection, where we would explain sort of the digital process of how they took the animations from the animated movies and then translated that into the games. So there's this whole elaborate process. It's a very interesting process. And then we had photos and images, and we could tell that story through a gallery, right? And it made sense. And that was sort of working for a while, but we kept coming back to like, how can we tell a more engaging, more interesting story? And then we started to talk to Jordan Mechner of Karateka and Prince of Persia fame, and wanting to work with him because a lot of us are huge fans of Jordan, especially making of Karateka and its impact on this industry as a whole, and its importance. And the thing about Jordan was that he was a meticulous note taker. He would write into a journal almost every day, and it would track his development as far as what he's working on, game-wise, his thoughts, feedback, and things like that. And it was amazing to go through and read that. And that book is published, actually. You can just read through his journals about the making of Karateka. And we're like, this would be amazing to be able to put it into a video game sort of component. Because when you watch a documentary on the television, the thing that's missing is that interactive component, right? You can watch it, but you can't do anything with it. And that's the thing that games can do well. And so what makes more sense as far as making a documentary about games than actually turning it into a game itself, right? But we weren't really sure how we would present this to the player. Like how much, there's a lot of logistics, like how much are people willing to read, right? They're not going to read a whole wall of text. How do we break this up, a journal, into a way that people would feel engaged constantly, and want to go through the whole thing? And so we were experimenting with it a lot, and kind of passing it around the studio and seeing who had ideas about it, and we'd mess around with it, tweak it, but couldn't quite figure out what we were going to do. At around the same time, a little bit into that, Atari came to us and they said, hey, we have a 50th anniversary coming up. We'd love you to kind of do a collection where you talk about the 50 years of Atari from the very beginning, the early days, such as the Pong era, right, all the way to where we are now, and tell that honest, truthful story about the ups and downs of the company and how it got to where it is. And what really got us thinking there is that Atari, previously over the last several years, have released their games out in various ways. Other collections they've released on their flashback consoles and stuff like that. So intrinsically, the games themselves aren't hard to find. You can get them if you want to. If you wanted to find the 2600 version of a game, you could go and get it through official channels and be able to play it. So the games themselves weren't inherently the selling point. We felt that the story was, and then we sort of came to this epiphany of like, well, what if we treated this like a museum exhibit where you could go into a dinosaur exhibit, for example, and you go into the room, and on the left is maybe like a video about dinosaurs, and then straight ahead is maybe some sort of interactive game kiosk, and then to your right is some images and maybe some placard with text. But the beauty of that is a bunch of different people can go in there and they can choose how they want to digest that information. If they want to see a video, they can. If they want to read about it, they can. But they can jump around. And it's that ease of being able to jump around and digest things the way you want to, and no rigid course of intake of the story. That was a compelling thing. And that really is part of the impetus of what shaped kind of this timeline, chronological timeline design that's behind Atari 50. And being able to present that in a chronological manner, which for a timeline makes sense, but then also like going vertically into topics, like literally diving deeper into a topic made visual sense, right? People
Yep.
get like, yep, time wise, go deep. And it really, really clicked with people. And they were like, yes, we can use all of these things. Games can be just another asset, just like a game design document, just like a piece of artwork to tell the story of what we're telling. And
Yep.
so we really went through iterations of that and came up with Atari 50 and the presentation of Atari 50, which is, for those who don't know, is very much when you boot it up, focused on the timelines themselves, the interactive documentary component of telling the story, and less on the games. You can bring up the games any way you want to. You can press a button and the games carousel will come up and you
Yep.
can access it. But really, fundamentally, the games aren't necessarily the stars of the collection. The story is.
Mm.
And that was such a unique approach to it that I remember when we're looking at it, we're like, are people going to get this? Like when they boot up and they don't see a list of games, are they going to understand what's going on here? And we had a little bit of trepidation, but really stuck by our guns and said,
Yep.
you know what? We feel strongly people are going to get it. This is a unique product. And then we sent it out there. Unfortunately, people did get it. It was very well received. Guinness World Records called us up and gave us a world record for first time of interactive timelines to that degree in a game,
That's
video game
incredible.
ever. So
well done. Well done, man.
yeah, thank you,
that's
thanks. So
so
we're Guinness
awesome.
World Record holders. But circling back, like having released Atari 50, we then said, oh, if we take this and we distill it down and we wrap it sort of in a more intimate story of like Jordan Mechner, we can create something also compelling on a smaller scale that people relate to and tell stories like Jordan Mechner, which is basically about a kid who wants to grow up and make video games. And his dad's like, well, you got to go to school, right? And him sneaking out and doing this stuff. And the amazing thing is like you can play now a prototype that he made, see that he sent it off out into the world for feedback, read the letters of that feedback, and then play the next prototype that reacts to that letter. And you can see that. So intrinsically now you see this organic growth of him as a video game developer and how his story unfolds and moves on. And there's something intrinsically magical about that. And it makes it a lot more personable and relatable being able to see that and interact with it. So that's what fueled the sort of creation of our Gold Master series, which is more of our kind of smaller scope, intimate focuses on either a person or a company or a franchise. But we started with Jordan Mechner's The Making of Karateka, and then we jumped over to Llamasoft and Jeff Minter on his games, who is more known over the other side of the pond in the UK, less in the United States. But again, a lot of us grew up with him and sort of his trippy psychedelic kind of games that he released, right, and his impact on the world.
Yep.
And then the third one was sort of Tetris, and people are like, well, Tetris, in comparison, Tetris is a huge IP. And I was like, that's true, but the story is still about, this one guy who saw this game, went off to the Soviet Union, got the rights for it. There was a friendship that bonded out of that, and that friendship is still existing today, right? It's this very human, relatable story. And I think that's what fuels sort of the Gold Master series. So that's, kind of takes us that evolution to where we have now, where we've done now a couple of fighting game collections. We've done Street Fighter, we've done a Samurai Showdown, and we've learned from those. And then we've done a lot of these now interactive documentaries and learned from those. And then now we're taking all of that stuff and kind of taking the best of it and all of the lessons and then merging it into what will eventually be the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. So we're really excited about that.
So I guess the first sort of really big question for me is, who approached who?
Right. So it's always an interesting kind of thing. The difference between sort of us and is that we're always in constant communication with a lot of different companies.
Yep.
Just in general, even if we're not working with them. And I kind of joke, it's always a positive thing. I hear this a lot now where it's funny where people have grown to know what we do. So they'll say to me like, oh, we're not working with you yet, but we know we will eventually, so we should start preparing our materials now, right? Which is phenomenal, right? If you think about it, the whole pursuit of preservation and being able to dig through those old archives and protect them and sort them and is just great. But in relation to this product, ever since Street Fighter was done, I always wanted to do Mortal Kombat, and this was like 7 or 8 years ago. We
Mm,
finished Street Fighter. There's a lot of things we learned in Street Fighter, and of course, the next logical sort of progression would be Mortal Kombat. We ended up going to Samurai Showdown, another Japanese
mm,
oriented fighting game. But I've always wanted to do Mortal Kombat. We've always been talking about it with WB about it, but just things didn't work out. They were doing other initiatives or other focuses as far as their main game, so it never really sort of worked out.
mm.
But what I feel, and I can't say this 100%, but I think what might have really helped people to understand what we were doing is that they were able to look at, say, Atari 50, then
Yep,
look at Street Fighter and say, hey, these match together. I get that. I understand what this is intrinsically.
yep,
And so maybe that helped to roll the wheel forward a little bit. And, we were talking about this earlier. Things didn't happen previously, but sort of the planets got into alignment because of our evolution of what we worked on and the things that we pushed out into the world, and people were able to see that and understand what we do,
mm,
and then they felt more confident. They knew, based off of the things that we had released before with major franchises like Turtles, TMNT, the Cowabunga Collection. Obviously, we can be very trustworthy with major IP like that
yep,
and make it successful. And so I think all those pieces kind of, you know, came together to allow the doors to open as far as deeper discussions about
yep,
doing Mortal Kombat, right? Versus kind of more casual, like, oh yeah, that would be great. We should try to do that sometime. It
yep,
finally came ahead, and it's like, yeah, let's do this, right?
yep. Yeah, it was like watching that trailer was like you guys had plugged a TV into my brain or somehow tapped into it, like the Edward Nigma from Batman Forever,
Right?
just
Yeah.
feeding in. And I'm just watching this trailer going, this is nah, this isn't happening. I literally lost my mind because like since your trailers come out, there's obviously been a lot of speculation, discussion about what other games are going to get announced, all that sort of thing. And even I brought up the idea of the fact that with your Atari 50th, which is absolutely phenomenal,
Thank you.
you've actually added DLC to it, which I believe is the first time you've done that to a collection. Is that
Yes,
correct? Yeah.
in the recent years, yes, that is correct. Yes, in my era for sure, that was the first time that we've done it.
Yeah. And so I'm just like, I'm looking at this trailer and I'm like, this is insane. Like we're getting all of these old versions, not just obviously the arcade versions, which we've had. There was a previous collection that was done many, many years ago with the arcade collection.
Yes.
That was like MK1, 2, and Ultimate. But we're getting like just as an example, we're getting MK3, which I think is one of the first times, especially in the modern day, that we're getting an actual modern release of
Right.
it since either the PS1 days when it was a launch title or like
Hmm.
in was it I think it was in one of the Midway arcade collections, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, and then of course something like MK4, which has been, I can tell you, man, like in the MK community for us elder fellows,
Yes.
MK4 is like that is huge, like that is big because it's never been emulated like before. Never arcade. We've only ever had the home port of PS1 and 64, and
Right.
then of course eventually they did the Dreamcast version, which was gold.
Hmm.
So I'm just looking at this going, this is just absolutely wild that you've done this. I guess I mean there's many questions about it, but like one of the main questions is how do you end up choosing which versions to put in?
Mm.
So when you look at each game and you go, yep, we're going to choose. For example, I played a lot of the Master System of MK1, but you've got
Hmm.
the Game Gear version. So yeah,
Right.
like yeah, so
It's always a bit of a time sink as far as evaluating how we want to approach this.
mm,
Atari 50 was especially difficult because now I think that game has like 160 titles or something like that. Um, but there's a lot of titles to choose from in Atari 50, but we had to go through and meticulously like choose like, okay, is this one more important? We can't put 500 games in this collection. It loses its sort of, each individual game loses its value
yeah,
intrinsically. So you have to have a reason why you include every sort of version. So
mm,
we spent forever on Atari 50, like, okay, we're going to take this out. Okay, what's going to replace it and why? Oh, because this, it was the first to do this,
Yep.
or is the first to do this, or things like that. So there's a lot of discussion that we have in relation to the projects that we can control. In some cases, if we're doing a partnership with another company, there might be a thing where like, okay, we're only focused on X, Y, and Z. Like Street Fighter, Capcom was very clear, like, we only want to do the 12 arcade games, no home version. This is a celebration of the arcade games. And Warner Brothers and NetherRealm were big fans of Street Fighter 30th. They looked at it a lot. And so they originally were like, okay, what about just the arcade games? And we're like, no, we can't do that. We've had a release, granted it's been like 12 years ago, that had the arcade, the first three, roughly arcade games. The ones you're talking about, the arcade collection, right?
Yep.
If we're going to do this and we really want to try to tell as much of the story as possible, we should try to include as many of these as we can.
Yep.
And so we go into a situation like this saying, okay, let's try to include everything. Like, as far as the era that we're focused on, let's include everything. So let's say we start, leaving MK4 aside, the 2D era leading up to that, what can we include that encompasses everything? So we evaluate every platform, Master System, 32X, Game Gear, like everything that has come out on even Red Zone and like other weird versions of Mortal Kombat, the Game.com, right? Stuff like that. For those who ever had a Game.com. But then that's great. You've got your list. But then you have to start vetting it like, okay, what's feasible from a legal and licensing perspective, right? And what isn't, because maybe, for example, one company, and I'm just saying this vaguely, but one company's like owns, like, they own the title rights, but maybe they don't own the code rights, or they own the code rights, but there's some aspects of the art that aren't owned by them. So this happens across the board on everything that we work on. A lot of these games are old, and there is uncertainty about who owns what and things like that. In relation to MK, we start with like, yes, we want to include everything, and then we have to start whittling it down by like, okay, are there issues with rights? Are there licensing issues? Are there potential issues with, say, like source code or being able to emulate it? Things like that. So there's sort of a myriad of kind of reasons that we have to whittle it down. And then we also have to think about like, okay, well, we try to include as many as we can, but sometimes logistically, from a project scope and time-wise, you can't include everything, at least initially. And so we have to sort of balance out like, okay, what are the fan favorites that people want, along with what are versions like the Game Gear and 32X that maybe even the most diehard Mortal Kombat fans might not have had exposure to because they didn't have those platforms. And from a storytelling perspective, those are interesting stories to tell. As far as making those ports or bringing it to those platforms, what was good about those platforms, what was bad in comparison to the main ones that people did. We also view it from the perspective of like, and sometimes I always find this funny where for any collection, people say like, well, why did they include that version? That version's not very good.
I've seen comments like that.
Right. You always get points. But here's the thing. For every version that a person thinks is bad, that might be the version that another person grew up with. That was the only version that they had, that they could play the game, and they loved it because that's what they had. That is the nostalgic hit for them. When they play that game, a rush of endorphins come and good feelings come, right? And it may not be the greatest game in the world, but for them it is. So why would we want to just leave games out arbitrarily if we didn't have to, right? So amongst that stuff, as I said before, sort of rights issues or legal issues or source code or tech issues, emulation issues, we try to balance out the games that we feel are most important to tell the story overall. And that includes the ones that people are very knowledgeable about and played the most of, such as like the Genesis or Super Nintendo versions of MK1, for example, because that was huge, versus the ones that you may not get typically, such as the Game Gear and the 32X, right? But it's important to be able to tell that sort of story. So we kind of do a lot of thought process about it and try to balance it out. And we think about it from a overarching sort of tech perspective and development perspective as well, and what makes sense to get best bang for your buck in the timelines that we have. So it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of factors, but we spend a lot of time trying to iron that out and figuring out the best collection. And some may say, and I'll jump to this. Some people are like, why do you have the GBA games in there, for example, the later ones, which were,
Yep.
and
Yep. Yep.
there's a couple of reasons for that. I
Hmm.
mean, what I'll say right now is that two things, like, and say Mortal Kombat Advance, same thing as like Game Boy. Some people grew up with Mortal Kombat Advance, and that was the first kind of entry point that they had to really play
Yep.
Mortal Kombat. So we wanted to capture that. We already have, from a development perspective, a very mature GBA sort of emulation process
Yep.
that we can utilize for this. So if we're already doing, Mortal Kombat Advance, for example, as an example of what people might have grown up with and played, why not include the other ones as sort of potential, what I call bonus games, let's say?
Yep.
Why would we leave them out just to leave them out? If we can include them and we're able to,
Mm.
let's try to include them. Like I said, going back to like, hey, let's try to include as much as we can, knowing all the limitations that we have. But
Yep.
let's not just kick games to the curb just because we don't feel that they're either great or we grew up with them or they're the most popular or things like that.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. So I've been seeing the comments of like, why would people want to play the Genesis version when we literally have the arcade there? But what people don't understand, at least the younger generation don't realize,
Right.
is that a fighting game, or even like a lot of the big Sega titles, when they brought out Shinobi, Daytona, all that sort of stuff, these were the pinnacle perfect version. The arcade version was the perfect version. And so,
Right.
you're sitting at home with your 8-bit or 16-bit or even maybe the 32-bit era console, whichever one,
Right.
and you're scanning the magazines and you're comparing it with the other magazines, going, "Oh, that's kind of close. That's not too bad,"
Right.
and that builds this deep, just this huge connective tissue with
Mhm.
this stuff. So when you get at home, and you're arguing with your mates, yeah, you got the SNES version, but it's a little clunky. The Mega Drive version, that's tighter gameplay, but yeah, it doesn't sound as good. And
Mhm.
it's kind of hard because, like, obviously, a lot of kids grow up now, like everything's just straight out of the gate. There's one version and that's it.
Right.
But we would literally just pour over these magazines and the pictures, like these tiny, I mean tiny pictures, and we're dissecting
Yes.
all the pixels, going, "Oh, that looks real good. I wonder how close is it going to have all the sounds? Is it going to have all the music? How accurate is it going to be?" And you're 100% correct. There's a massive nostalgia just trip there, because we were trying to get the best version that was close to
Mhm.
perfection, and this was
Right.
the only way to do it. There was no other way to do it outside of even the 32X version, for example, of MK2
Yes.
is incredible. Like, I love the 32X. I loved it. I don't know, man. I love Sega and all their add-ons and stuff. It was cool, right?
Right. Right.
But
Right.
but it was great because they added in obviously the extra voices, things like that. But it was essentially the Mega Drive version with the Mega Drive music. I think it was, what's his name, Matt Furness, I believe it is. That did also, I think, the soundtrack for MK1. So it was very different to the arcade. And then they just added in extra voices, extra blood, a bit more animations, and
Right.
that also felt very separated from the original Genesis version, but it wasn't arcade perfect. Like, it wasn't one-to-one arcade, so you still
No.
got these major differences between. And yeah, that was a hell of an opiate back then, trying to get
Yeah.
the one that was just gonna scratch all the itches. So
Yeah, and it's true, and it's like, but everyone has that sort of version, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about online sort of later potentially, but the even the online perspective for us, it's sort of recreating that nostalgia, that experience that you had back in the day. But it's not the actual experience; it's how you remember the experience. If
yeah,
that makes sense. Oftentimes, people, when they perceive something or they remember something, it's a little bit brighter and better than what it actually was, right? And
yeah,
sometimes we've learned in the past where if we deliver on exactly what that experience was, people are like, "Oh, was it like this? I don't remember it like this." So we always strive to deliver on what people's memory
yeah,
of what that stuff is in some ways. But really, the point was there was a huge number of people who grew up playing games, laying on their carpet in their living room, plugging in Mortal Kombat,
yeah,
right, and playing with their brother or their friend, and it was a happy time for them.
Yep.
And so, even on the online perspective, maybe now the only thing that's separating people are distance. So if we can
Mm.
allow you to be able to plug in and load up Mortal Kombat 2 for Super Nintendo, for example,
Yep.
and be able to play with your brother who maybe you're in California, he's in Florida or something, and
Yep.
recapture that moment in time again, that's worth doing.
Yep.
It is sort of this key magical time, and we want to try to replicate that and allow people to sort of do that. And so a lot of our choices and the way that we approach stuff is all about making things easier or recapturing that moment in time, that's frozen
Mm.
time for you, that everyone had that perfect moment sort of playing these games. And we want to do that for this collection as well.
It is true. Like with the your Cowabunga collection, especially. I mean, dude, like that. You put like I think almost everything I can feasibly
Mm.
remember that they brought out for TMNT back in the day. Even all the fighting games. So some people don't even realize that they brought out. There was like two fighting games that came out. I think it was
Yes.
might have even been three. Yeah, because I think there was a NES version as well. And both
Yes.
versions were different. So the Mega Drive Genesis version
Hmm.
had a different roster compared to the Super NES
Yes.
version. And I don't know what it is about the Mega Drive version, bro. It's so hard. Like I don't know what it is. It is really difficult to play, but it's cool, you know. And I still remember. So yeah, you're right. Like when you load these games up, it's you get that flashback. You remember the feel of the carpet
Yes.
under your butt, you know, and
Yeah.
you know, and remember, you know, the weight of the controller connected with the cord to the console, and you know,
Right.
stuff like that. And that is, you know, that's I think it's important. I think that's really important, and I'm so grateful that you guys actually have that approach with not obviously not just the MK collection, but also the other ones that you've done, because that you're not just giving a collection here, go, you know, enjoy. You're trying to create an experience. You're creating almost like a story mode for the entire collection, you know, that is completely interactable. So that way, you know, people are going on this journey throughout the whole thing, and
Yes.
that's very cool. Like with your trailer, when I saw John Tobias walk out, you know, next to Ed Boon, I'm just like,
Yeah.
what the f? What
Yeah.
is going on, man? This is just
Yeah.
perfect. So,
Yeah. It was a magical moment for me too. Like we went obviously to NetherRealm to film, interview many people. We interviewed um, over 25 people for this collection, which is the most we've ever interviewed
that's
for a
fantastic.
collection. It's a staggering amount of content
Yeah,
if you think about it.
yeah,
But you kind of have to, in order to be able to tell the story from different perspectives. Obviously, you've got to grab the original four guys in their 20s, trying to make something cool that
yeah,
everyone would like, right? John and Ed and Vogel and Dan Ford
yeah,
and which was cool, but also there's all the other perspectives. There's like the people who did the home ports and sort of like the decisions that they made to do that, and how we were discussing it earlier, like what choices are made in order to try to deliver upon the most accurate arcade version, and why were
mm,
these sort of decisions made.
yeah,
The performance capture folk like Kerry Hoskins, right, and
yeah,
Sal DeVita, because that whole aspect of coming here and being filmed and doing these over exaggerated moves and then being brought out and recognized by people. It's like a surreal kind of
yeah.
experience. And those two are great. I hadn't met them before we did this project, but both of those are great people. They're very funny and they just get along great and just fun to be around and chat. And there's some great content from them
Yep.
in the collection. But it was really important to be able to tell as much of this story as we can. That, like I said, that starts up a little bit before, which is like leading up to the steps of Mortal Kombat 1, and basically the time where these four young guys kind of came together with their love of martial arts and Jean
Mm,
Claude Van Damme, and just wanted to make a
yeah.
cool sort of action fighting game, right? And how that evolved and changed, and they were so on the same right wavelength with each other, where they knew what was good, the other people were gonna like and,
Yeah.
and dig and stuff like that. Um, and then this whole IP becoming kind of a cultural phenomenon, right? The Acclaim marketing campaign with the Mortal Monday,
Yep.
and that just a huge, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo
Yep.
battle there,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
all the way through to like say Mortal Kombat 4 from the standpoint that like while MK4 is exciting, and just like you said, the arcade version hasn't been really emulated properly ever in for retail release.
Yep.
But what's interesting about that beyond it is this was the era where everyone was starting to transition to 3D and trying to figure it out.
Yep.
So you have a franchise where they've developed the tools and systems to continue to build up and make bigger and bigger 2D games. And then now, as with all the other rest of the industry, they have to transition to 3D. So what are the challenges there? They're having to sort of fundamentally, as most people, have to start from scratch to a degree, right?
Yep.
And kind of go from there and where the decision. So it's very interesting story from the standpoint of where the industry was going, sort of as well, the transition from 2 to 3D. So there's just a lot of great stories there to put together. There's gonna be a lot of videos, and the wealth of content from even the interview side, I think is going to blow people away, and being able to see everyone come together and chat and talk about Mortal Kombat again is going to be pretty neat. Obviously for older fans, especially who grew up with these folks, but even from even if you're sort of a casual fan of Mortal Kombat, just like, oh, I want to learn more about this property and stuff like that, this is a great way to kind of go into it. And that's the other thing, that's important for us is we want to make sure that we are catering to both casual fans and hardcore fans, right? You sort of expressed that you've been a hardcore classic fan for a long time, and obviously we need to deliver on your sort of expectations. But there's a whole large number of people who maybe played it back in the day and kind of walked away, and then are still interested in it, but haven't played it in a while. So how do you get them engaged? And the few ways that we want to do it is obviously the story and make that engaging and interesting, but also getting rid of some of the roadblocks that keep people away in some cases, such as all the secrets and hidden stuff and things like that. So back in the day, obviously, when Mortal Kombat first came out, the secrets were a great thing because it got you to put in quarters and figure out what was real and what wasn't. And again, it was before the major growth of the internet. So finding information was hard. Sharing it was sort of difficult. People were writing stuff down. People were convinced that they saw stuff, what was true and what wasn't, right? It was a compelling component of this franchise. But the issue now, decades later, is that you get people who might say, oh, you know what? I'd love to get into Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, for example. But there's just so many secrets and hidden menus within menus and things like that, and hidden characters. I wouldn't know where to begin. I don't want to look online and things like that. So what we want to do as a big component of this is what I call is basically like no more secrets, right? It's like, how do we make all of this stuff easily accessible to all the fans and casual folks who play this, so that you're no longer required to go look up something in a strategy guide or online or write notes down as far as how to do something. Everything is presented to you in a very sort of accessible way. And I'll give you an example. One great, very simple example is fighting Reptile in Mortal Kombat 1, right? People are like, okay, I got to go look online. How do I fight Reptile in Mortal Kombat 1? So we failed if you have to leave the game and do it. So we should be able to provide that information to you. But the beauty of what we're doing is that you can just go into Mortal Kombat 1 and go, I want to fight Reptile. And then we take you in and you just fight Reptile.
Wow.
And you can see what it's like, right? So the point is that when you finish this collection, or when you've played these games and seen all that we have to offer, you truly feel confident that you've seen everything that these games have to offer. There's no more confusion or uncertainty about what's real and what isn't, or some secret menu that did exist or didn't. and you can discover it all. But if you still want to like go in and enter like the dullard code or anything like
Yeah.
that you remember from back in the day, we won't stop that. You can still do that and lock at things normally.
Yeah.
But for those people who just want to be able to see all the content, the hidden characters and stuff like that, we're going to make that very easy and very approachable
Yeah.
to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. So, and it's because you say no more secrets, but your trailer is full of secrets. Like, let's be,
Yeah,
like,
it's
I mean,
true.
your trailer's like, yeah, you're going, yep, no, we got some stuff here. We're not telling you yet. But so, all right, here's to build on that, and obviously, like I don't expect answers with this, but like I know one struggle that people have had with the classic games. Not for us OGs, because we basically figured out how to cheat the AI, right?
Right.
And I know a lot of things. If you certain emulators and whatnot, they might have everything from, or even in game, some of the in game menus will have like
Right.
infinite health, one hit kills, stuff like
Yep.
that. I'm going to assume then, based on what you've said, is that you'll have possibly maybe access to that type of thing. So those people that do struggle against the AI, because let's be honest, the AI is cheap. I mean, it's cheap. It was designed to steal your money. It was designed to steal your money, right? Like it's like, nah, we're gonna do crazy shit you can't actually do, like sweep throws in MK2 and stuff like
Right.
that. Like it's like, but would it be fair to assume that possibly there would be things maybe that make it easier for people to deal with those challenges if they don't if they found those games too difficult to fight
Right.
because they just couldn't figure out the patterns or anything like that. So
Exactly. Yeah, sort of valid point. And we're looking at a variety of ways to do this. Obviously, some of the immediate ways that we've done in the past is being able to just do quick saves and quick loads and stuff like
yeah,
that. So
yeah,
as you make progress, being able to save and not losing and having to start all over
yeah,
again.
yeah,
Um, we're evaluating still usage of things like potentially like rewind and how that would work in the context of a fighting game, right? Like, does it make sense to um, utilize the ability to jump back 5 seconds to do something, or you get trapped in a corner or something like that?
yeah,
Does that make sense? So we're at that sort of process where we're kind of looking at ways to make that experience a little bit easier or more forgiving for players and
yeah,
things like that. I won't say no or yes to sort of anything along the lines of like, changing the AI behavior and things like that, because that's, there, we'd love to sort of figure out a way to smooth that out in some cases,
yeah,
but that whole opens up a whole can of worms, and it can sort of break stuff as
yeah,
well, and things like that. So we have to sort of find a balance of like, okay, this is the experience that people expect, but what are some tools or options that we could potentially add that would make it a little bit easier, more
mm,
approachable, right?
yeah,
So we're still ironing what we're gonna include in the final product there, but we
yeah,
are sort of thinking about that and evaluating it. And also the thing is, even if we don't necessarily get everything in that we want to for this release of this product, we are always going to listen to consumers. And if something comes back and you're like, hey, we love your product, but this is something that we feel really should be included in it, we'll continue to work on it. We're never that studio where it's kind of like, okay, it's released, we're moving on, right?
yeah,
That's never the case.
yeah,
We listen to support. Turtles was a classic example. I think the post-launch patch for Turtles had so many features. It was one of our most number of like additional consumer-facing features that we've ever added to a product post-launch. And part of that was consumer feedback. Part of that was like you brought up the fighting games, but the tournament fighters community coming back and saying like, "Hey, could you do this, this, and this?"
yeah,
And other things, adding sort of audio filters for the Mega Drive version and
yeah,
things. But we listened and gathered all of this stuff, and we were able to push it out there and try to deliver on as many of the consumers' sort of thoughts and feedbacks and posts as possible. Obviously, for this product, we are engaging with the community. We have been for a while, trying to make sure that we cover everything that we can think of
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah,
But until you get this out into the hands of the fans and the consumers,
yeah,
you don't really know if you've managed to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, right? So we're going to try to do our best to do everything that we can. But we will always be open to feedback and comments, and more often than not, we can certainly try to act upon them potentially based
Yep.
on how complex they are and things like that.
So, this is an easy question. What's your favorite Mortal Kombat game, and which
Mhm.
version of it? So, which platform?
I would say still, and this is sort of a probably similar to a lot of people, but the arcade version of MK2
Mm,
is probably my favorite because when I was going to the University of Oregon, for some reason, that arcade there was a very good one. We used to get like early versions of the game or be one of the first in the country to sort of get games.
mm,
Um, and I was a big Street Fighter. I still am a big Street Fighter fan. And I enjoyed playing Mortal Kombat 1, but it wasn't until MK2 and the look of MK2
mm.
and the additional juggle stuff that they did in MK2, it started
Yep.
to feel a lot more engaging. And I told Ed Boon this too, but like one of my whenever someone mentions Mortal Kombat to me, the immediate thought that pops in my brain, which is sort of my feel good moment for Mortal Kombat in general, is MK2 had just come out. It was literally the first day that we got it at the University of Oregon. And some people had already written down some fatalities or notes and stuff. And there was a huge crowd. And I got up and I played Liu Kang. And I felt that I was going to win. And I yelled out, like, someone give me a fatality so I can prepare.
Yep.
And someone just yells out, down forward, back, back, high kick, right? The
Yep.
dragon fatality.
Yep.
And I did beat him right after that. And not only that, but I was able to do it, and it actually worked. So it was my first moment playing Mortal Kombat
Nice.
2, my first moment of winning, and my first moment of actually being able to perform under fire a new fatality that someone had just yelled out from
Yep.
the crowd that I didn't even know was right. So
Yep.
just all of those, we talk about planets in alignment, but that was such an amazing moment, and everyone was like, for a lot of people, that was the first time they ever saw the Liu Kang Dragon fatality,
Yep.
and it was sort of a magical moment. So it's always kind of been a special game for me and a special moment. So that's sort of why I lean towards
Yep.
MK2 arcade version.
So the first time I saw MK2 was I was coming out of the cinema with my girlfriend at the time, and everyone was crowded around. I didn't know even MK2 was coming out, and it was like kind of next to the popcorn machine. And
Mm.
I remember seeing it, but this was, I don't know how we ended up with it, but this was like, it was a zero point X something version. It wasn't a 1.0
Mm.
version.
Right.
This was the one that had Baraka's blade spin, like his blade top spin, where he puts his
Oh.
arms out and he spins like a top. And I remember that distinctly. And then, of course, obviously after that, they started bringing out the later revisions and they removed it. I think because it was probably so OP. But um, do we? So yeah, the question for that, I suppose, is for the arcade versions. Is it something that you're looking at to put in different revisions, or are you just basically going to go with like 3.1, for MK2,
Right.
5.0 for MK1? Is it you just take the latest last version basically?
Yeah, I mean, we had talked about that as far as like, oh, how cool would it be if you could go through the timelines and play the different prototype versions of it?
Yep.
But having them playable and doing the work for that, in some cases, doesn't yield very much. The changes aren't like huge. It's
Yep.
almost better to just be able to articulate them or show it in
Yep.
video or talk about it. And that makes more sense. And then you can just focus on the core games that you want to include.
Yep.
Could that change if we get crazy and we decide? But yes, there's been discussions about different versions of it, some
Yep.
of which have been lost to the winds as
Yep.
far as like source code for
Yep.
certain versions of the Mortal Kombat titles.
Yep.
But yeah, we always evaluate stuff like that. Sometimes it's worth it. Like I gave the example of Jordan Mechner's like prototypes where he would do it, and you get an explanation, and you do
Yep.
another prototype, another prototype. Like we have that, and it makes sense, and there's enough differences between them
Yep.
to justify it. Mortal Kombat, maybe we might end up including a few, but most of the revisions are just little balance adjustments or tweaks that aren't hugely meaningful enough to like be able to like to work to get them up and running and be able to play them. It's just not worth it necessarily.
Yep.
But it's something we're still evaluating. I don't want to say yes or no to that. There may be some still prototypes that show up,
Yep.
but right now we're still kind of we're trying to figure out the value of that and if it's worth the extra sort of development time frames in order to get those up and running just for minimal amount of gain from it,
Yeah.
right?
So I mean, and I said this before we started this. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I know you also said you're very good at
Mhm.
fielding questions. Like, nah, I'm not dealing with that. But I'm assuming that in the
Mhm.
trailer, the 4 question marks that show up on the big montage that's zooming out,
Mhm.
the 4 question marks, is there actual source attached to that as far as possible
Yes,
reveals
I
down the
will
track?
say, yeah, I will say that we have not revealed all the games, and that
Yep,
there will be a number of games that are revealed in the coming months.
yep,
Um, and you know, some might be ones that people expect and assume, and some might be ones that people aren't thinking about or
yep,
don't expect. So
yep,
I think it's a nice balance. It's always the case where um, everyone wants everything, right? Like I
yep.
know there's a huge, and I'll say this here, I know there's a huge thing like, oh, Mortal Kombat 9. Like Mortal Kombat,
Oh
we
yeah,
love Mortal Kombat
yeah,
9, right? But as your videos say, Mortal Kombat 9 is so close to now, like it's so far away from where
yep,
we are right now. Will we ever get there? That
yep,
would be amazing, right? If we could go through and
yep.
progress along. But we have to start at the beginning,
Yes,
and we have to like start the story somewhere and build out the foundation of this, and then we can grow from there.
yep,
And whether potentially maybe it's like a follow-up volume or DLC, who knows?
yep,
We've done both, right, in the past,
yep,
but we're not going to jump way ahead to do MK9. I'll tell
yep,
you that right now. We're not
yeah,
going to do MK9. It doesn't make sense. The amount of development time just to get MK9 working on all the different platforms would be considerable. I mean,
yes,
that's not why we wouldn't do it, but it's more so of like the amount of time and effort to not only get all of these base versions up and running, but to
mm,
do all the quality of life improvements,
yep,
to do all the behind the scenes story. It's a staggering amount of time.
yep,
And hopefully, when people see the product, they'll see the time and energy that has gone into it.
yep,
And so they'll understand. Obviously, right now, all they see is a trailer and just like, we want everything.
yeah,
Um,
yep,
right? But there's a logical progression to stuff. We
yes,
can't include everything from Mortal Kombat 1 to Mortal Kombat 9. It's just not possible right now in
yeah,
this scope from either technological limitations or just from the standpoint of the amount of time required to be able to tell the story of these different eras,
yep,
whether it's 2D era, the 3D era, the NetherRealm era,
yep,
however you split it up.
yep,
But all I can say is we would love to get there. I feel that we have a strong foundation here,
mm,
and it really depends on the interest of fans and the public as far as like, do they want to see more after they've seen what we do? And if they do, we'd be more than happy to, if Warner Brothers is open, NetherRealm, we'd be more than happy to try to continue telling the story forward if we can. But right now,
yep.
we got to focus on the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I on the channel, like I've been a big 2D advocate, but I've always said that if they were to ever bring back the past, you've got to do it in the proper allotments. To me, it's
Yeah.
sort of at MK 2D era goes from say MK1 all the way up to, and I know it gets flack, but I
Yeah.
would love to have something like Special Forces. To me, that's the bookend in my
Right.
mind. And then you got
Right.
the 3D era. And then obviously
Mhm.
because people go, oh, but the Game Boy Advances are in there, that means we're going to get the 3D era
Right.
of say Deadly Alliance, and it's like, well, maybe, but in my sort of like proper alignment,
Mhm.
compartmentalized brain, it's like no, because again, because of the way that you guys create your
Mhm.
content, the storytelling, like when Deadly Alliance came out, like the big release of the 3D era was Deadly Alliance. So that's to me,
Mhm.
that's the start. And then it bookends with say something like Shaolin Monks, and then you would have maybe another collection where you could have say MK vs DC and MK9.
Mhm.
Is like a duology. And that's stuff I've been like pimping that out forever, right? Like forever, man. And so like even though like there's a lot of 3D era guys, guys in their 30s now who are like, oh my god, like this is like wow, if they're doing this, that means that eventually we might get that. And it's like, well,
Right.
let's hope so, because imagine like these guys being able to, as you said, like play these games that were their era of
Yeah.
MK across the country, across the world, reconnecting, setting up tournaments on their channels, playing with
Yeah.
their fans, playing with their friends. Just that, like the excitement I've seen, just everyone just absolutely go bananas over just this one trailer.
Yeah.
It's been phenomenal.
Yeah, it's great and it's exciting. And I think really, the next thing we can sort of do is hopefully start to show more of the behind the scenes and the timeline stuff we're doing and things like that, so that people who are more the casual fans can say, like, oh, this is more than just a connection, right? A collection of like the games, and that's it, right? We never do that. Like, we have never done that. And I said to you earlier, like, just getting the games up and running is our ticket through the door. That's our starting point.
Yeah.
And then where do we go from here, right?
Yeah.
So, I would say to fans, stay tuned. We have a lot to show still, a lot of details to reveal about what we're doing with online and the other quality of life improvements and all the other things that we have going on with this product. But we're trying to do the best that we can. We have a lot of MK fans on the team.
Yep.
One of the things I shared with you about the plans and alignment, one of the examples of that is one of our writers, Dan Emmerich, who is a huge MK nut, and he, in his early days, also came from the sort of press side. But in the early days, after Ultimate 3 was, I think, out, and MK4 was still in development.
Yeah.
He was a huge fan at that point, and he had pitched to Midway, I believe, the idea of like, hey, I'd love to write a story, like a book about Mortal Kombat at that point.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, that's great. Put us together a pitch and stuff. And he got so nervous that he just didn't do it because he hadn't written a book before. He didn't know, right? It's the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, am I good enough to do something like this that I love so much? So now Dan is on our team, and decades later, he finally gets to deliver
nice
on being able to tell that story, right? But now with all of the understanding experience that he's had over the last few decades, and his friendships and stuff that he's built up with people like Kerry Hoskins and other folks in the industry, and it was, he handled a lot of the interviews that we did, and just, the comfort that they have because they know him from the past or know him recently, or he's a friend and stuff like that, and being able to get that information out of them and be able to just have a casual conversation about the history of Mortal Kombat in a trusting situation is a huge difference than like some unknown person coming in and saying like, hey, I want to talk about Mortal Kombat, tell me all the juicy bits and stuff like that. It's a whole different kind of atmosphere, and I think that will carry across to the videos that people will see. I think we came at the right time. Obviously, as people know, the work on Mortal Kombat 1 was sort of winding down. And I think, and I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I think Ed and John and those guys were getting nostalgic anyway, right? They had worked on back-to-back Mortal Kombats, modern Mortal Kombat, and this was their chance to kind of go back down memory row and sort of reminisce about the good old days to some degree and be able to tell their story. So, while I've been pursuing this for a number of years, I think now is the perfect time to sort of do it, given the situation with everyone, the people we have on the team, and also the willingness for Ed and NetherRealm and all these other folks to kind of come together and be able to honestly tell this story that everyone wants to hear.
Yeah. It was I was going to ask, like, I mean, and obviously, like, you don't have to share, but I just sort of, I wonder, like, when you're watching the guys talk, the two guys, like the couple that, the co-creators of this incredible franchise, did you pick up on any sort of sense of like, it's kind of like, when you hear that favorite song, you're like, when you're watching an Adam Sandler movie, this is the best example.
Right.
You're watching an Adam Sandler movie, and Adam, he loves playing all these like 80s music and stuff.
Right.
And as soon as you hear it, you're like, that's it. Yep, that's it, man. That's my drive. Did you get the same sense seeing Ed Boon and John Tobias talking? Did you see them light up, and go, oh yeah, like, and get that energy and excitement and that, like, yep, this is what made us so happy with MK.
Yeah, I think you really get that because obviously, Ed and John are still close friends, but they're separated by distance, and and probably haven't seen each other in a while. So I think there was sort of a magical, when I was there, seeing John walk into the NetherRealm studio and talk to Ed. And Ed is generally like, is very friendly and guy, but you can see him open up around people that he knows really close, which is sort of the same thing with Dan, right? He knew Dan. Like, it's opening up and trusting of the people that you know. And so obviously just the atmosphere sort of shifts when John comes in, or even, they're really great friends with like Carrie Hoskins and Sal, and like it's like a family coming back together
Yeah.
again. It's amazing to sort of see. And the the scene at the end of the trailer where John walks up and presses start on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
MK1
Yeah.
arcade cabinet was kind of a surreal moment. Like I was like snapping photos of that moment from the back because I was just standing outside of camera view, right? But
Yeah.
it was kind of just an amazing moment for them to see, like, how do you see like those two guys like sitting, like actually playing a Mortal Kombat game together, right? It's like, it's crazy to a degree. So yeah, it was amazing.
Can we know which characters they were using? I'm just curious. Do you remember the fighters they were using?
Oh no, I can't, because I don't think I saw the. I'd have to look at the footage. I couldn't see the screen because they were sort of blocking it from the sides.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't remember. I expect that footage will show up somewhere in one of the videos or something like that. But we had so many different camera angles on that to sort of film it. But yeah, I was behind them, so I couldn't see it.
Yeah. So with the trailer itself, like that again, like I was saying, like that was a masterstroke. Like because obviously, like with the more recent games that they've made over the years with NetherRealm, I kind of haven't felt that MK vibe. But this trailer, like the music, the thunder, clap sound effects,
Right.
everything was just tuned perfectly. And you had me fooled, man, because I thought, okay, we're going through the arcade in the beginning, everything was
Yes.
kind of blurred out on the screen, so it was completely like, no, we're not giving anything away. And then I just heard that, like, come here, and I'm just like, whoa. And so who was the genius that put or the geniuses that put all that together? Because whoever did it had the vibe of MK. Like they really got what it was like to sell MK to get people excited about that old school feeling. It's amazing, dude. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thank you. It took a lot of iteration, I'll tell you that. Sean, we have this trailer editor who's amazing. We've worked with before on a few of our past projects, but he tends to get the tone of it and is able to do a strong foundation. And everyone's sort of giving feedback, but for me, it's like I want to get like the goosebumps a little bit, right?
Yeah,
and especially for games that I love, I want it to come across like the end of like, I want it to be a trailer that I can watch like a lot. And I watched that trailer a lot because we went through so many iterations. Like I watched that trailer probably 1,000 times in different forms of cuts, right?
Yeah.
And I knew it so well that when Sean would edit a little bit, I'm like, wait a minute, what did you? No, there's something weird about the hand movements here. Like it's missing. What? He's like, oh, I just cut out like half a second, and I got to know it really well, so well from cut to cut. But I think it's honestly because you have a group of people who grew up loving Mortal Kombat.
Yep.
That the energy that came from the Mortal Kombat, Mortal Monday kind of stuff, and wanting it to just feel cool, but also, like you said, have that little air of mystery where you see the opening, you're like, what is this for? And then if you recognize Ed and John's voice, you can get it. And then maybe you recognize the similar font, but if you don't, then you get the Scorpion, and then you get, right? But we wanted to reveal it, like, what is this? What is this? What is this, right?
Yeah.
And not have it in your face, like, immediately. Have that little bit of a guessing thing.
I have to apologize. I do. It's like straight up, because when I was I was reacting to it live, right? And, when they did the 30th anniversary, like nothing, there was just like this thank you trailer. And then obviously the years have gone on, and it's like, man, Street Fighter got a 30th, and it's like, oh, why can't we get something like that again? Like, why couldn't we get something like that for MK? And then there was a certain point where I'm like, this better not be some behind the scenes shit, like, and then it starts doing, I think, the big zoom out with all the games, and I just lost it, man. And I'm just like, finally, oh my god, like, just God has listened. This is incredible, and I slowed that down, dude. I slowed that trailer down to a quarter speed, and I'm looking at every screen. I'm like, what is that? And then people are going,
Yeah.
oh no, that's got to be trilogy because it's a background. No, no, it's not that. It's no, it's not that, right? You know, and we're kind
Right.
of, you know, like, you know, when you've made a good trailer, when like everyone is dissecting it, you know,
Right.
everyone is dissecting it and trying to figure out, you know, what's coming and that sort of thing, which is why, like, you know, yeah, it'd be awesome to know what's coming now, but I like the idea that we're not going to know yet. That's the secrets of MK. You're literally doing that. You've given us the
Yeah.
tease. You put the question marks there, like on the tower in
Yeah.
MK2, and it's like,
Yep.
okay, all right. So now we're speculating, and that's what I was saying. Like, it was absolute masterstroke, man. You guys did a
Well,
phenomenal job. So
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's always tough because it's hard to balance like how much in your face stuff needs to be for people to notice it. And I was always like, nervous about that sort of thing and like how the question marks, like how in your face they need to be, or even things we had early versions of it where let's say we potentially weren't going to do 32x and then like the ending where it does the toasty, it's the 32x version. I'm like, well,
yep,
people recognize if we don't say it's 32x, well, people recognize that as the 30, like think like,
yep,
and sometimes I overanalyze it because it's like how much will people notice, right? You sort of question it, but
yep,
people are pretty savvy. They sort of figure this stuff out
yep.
sort of after a while. But it was fun to do. It was a really fun trailer to do. Like I said, we went through a lot of different versions because we wanted to be just good and like how do we keep the excitement up and how do we appeal to both casual fans who are Mortal Kombat excited about it, but also to like hardcore folks who would recognize Ed Boon and John Tobias. Like how do you balance all of this stuff and also like do things like, hey, we are doing behind the scenes stuff. How do you convey that to folks too? But really focus on the games and the excitement about that. So it was really a fun trailer to do, and I'm glad people enjoyed it.
Now I do have a question, obviously among the many, but like on your X page, I
Mm-hmm.
believe there's a screenshot of Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. It looks like it's on a monitor, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think it was something like, "Oh, we've wrapped up at Summer Games Fest." So my question was, hang on a sec,
Oh.
did these guys actually have a playable build at Summer Games Fest? Because I want to talk to these people. Where are these people? Like, I want to know. So I was going to ask
Oh,
about that.
oh, right. That was more of like I won't say what was there, what wasn't, but it
That's
was
all right.
more
That's
of
all right.
like it was more about like getting people or certain group of reviewers, kind of not reviewers, press, like
Yep.
really up to snuff as far as like the Digital Eclipse story and what we were doing with Mortal Kombat.
Yep.
So I wanted to just be able to show examples of stuff and be able
Yep.
to talk about Mortal Kombat.
Yep.
I will say that um, more stuff in meaningful ways will be revealed for everybody in the months
Yep.
sort of ahead. This was more of a specific case focused on specific goals from a press perspective.
Yep.
And hopefully they'll be talking about it too. But that was a great sort of experience because we had and I might have mentioned this to you earlier, but like some folks who were really just choked up a little bit about Mortal Kombat and just their experience growing
Yep.
up and like the emotional
Yep.
like the nostalgia and like it was kind of amazing. Some folks who had the dragon uh, logo tattoos
Yep.
like hardcore and stuff
Yep.
like that. So it was really amazing to be able to talk to. I mean, if I could, I would talk to everyone as much, because I love sharing, because I
Yep.
think it's the best way to show people the level of excitement that we have or I have. Like I
Yep.
could talk endlessly about this and exude, share my excitement and the team's excitement for Mortal Kombat. And it's important because we really care. We're like, folks who want to make the IPs, worthy and just make them sort of presented a way, the best way possible, so that when people put in this collection, they're like, this is exactly what I wanted. This is what I envisioned it to be.
Yep.
There's so much information here and so many assets that I haven't seen, and all of these games are accessible in one place. And so it's a lot of hard work, and I think our toughest critics are ourselves that
Yep.
we put on this. But we come from it from being Mortal Kombat fans ourselves, so try to hold ourselves to as high a standard as possible, right?
You like exude the same sort of vibe that when when you go back and you watch the old Midway like videos of behind the scenes and them mucking around in the offices and talking like
Right.
that. Like what you're describing is exactly what I saw with with the original Midway team. You know, just
Mm.
this family, you know, just a bunch of, you know, friends hanging out, like making this cool thing. They're all, you know, some of them are dressed like dads. They just look like they just woke up in
Right.
some of their clothes, you know, they don't care.
Yeah.
And but there was something very, very visceral and very real about, you know, about that, you know, seeing that. And it sounds like you guys have that same pulse, you know. So instead of obviously you guys being the ones that created MK, now
Mm.
you're the curators of MK. You know, with this
Mm.
collection, you're making sure that
Right.
the museum of MK is going to be, you know, authentically replicated, you know, forward for people. And
Yes.
that in on itself is exciting. One of my friends, he had one question, which obviously I don't think you're going to be able to answer, but this is how detailed like we get. And he's like, oh, you know, ask him what are the menus going to be like? Are you going to walk up to arcade machines? You know, all this sort of stuff. You know, things like that. And obviously, like I know you probably can't answer that, but that's how we think because
Right.
that was also part of the experience. You know what I mean? Like it's just the way that, you know, we'll even from the start, you know, going like how do we access stuff, you know, how it's going to be laid
Mhm.
out, that intricacy, yeah, like that sort of stuff is, yeah, that's pretty cool, man. So
Yeah, it's a little bit you know, you can see elements of it from our Atari 50 and Gold Master series, but really for this collection, the games are the focus from the standpoint that, like, you know, a year, 2 years now, people will want to be able to get into the games as quickly as possible.
yep,
You know, Atari 50 was kind of like, you know, you had a button to it and you kind of went through and
yep,
it's, we have a lot more functionality that we need to add to these games, such as online and offline and things like
yep,
that. And how do we present that? So in that ways, you know, you probably see elements of like Street Fighter in there if you look at Street Fighter. Um, but we will have the cabinet views, like, you know, we go out and we even take photos. Like right now we're scouring the San Francisco Bay Area for like certain arcade aspects of the arcade cabinet that we take photos of.
yep,
Like people don't wear that, but we do. We go in and we like, what's the bezel look like,
yep,
and
yep,
take a photo of that. And how does the light of the CRT reflect off onto the bezel? Like
yep,
most people don't think about that stuff, but like that's the stuff that we think about, or the CRT scan line filters, and how does that look in relation to Mortal Kombat? Because a lot of these games, especially Mortal Kombat, relied on the CRT look in order to fill in gaps and add
yep,
more colors than the hardware allowed.
yep,
So really, you know, it's kind of the nitty-gritty that most people don't think about, but we have to spend a lot of time thinking about in order to try to be as accurate
mm,
as possible. But the amazing thing is just being able to work closely with NetherRealm and, you know, letting them play it and
mm,
check it out in our emulation, and like, yeah, this is great, and their excitement for it, and wanting to see new builds. It's just a great partnership, and you know, it's always great to be able to work, and we've been blessed with this a bit, like to work with great partners who trust us
yep,
and who want to just help us create the best product possible, and
mm,
don't get in the way,
yep,
you know. And so it's been great sort of working with NetherRealm and these legendary folks, some of which have been working on the Mortal Kombat franchise for decades and decades and decades, right?
yep,
Like Ed and Dan Ford and things like that. So it's been sort of an amazing and sort of humbling experience. We just want to channel our, like you're saying, our fanboyism into a product that will get other fanboys to really love and enjoy. And for people who maybe for some reason didn't get into modern Mortal Kombat and still
yep,
enjoy the older games, here's sort of the chance, the resurgence, to sort of come back and jump back into it and kind of bring back together that older community
yep,
of folks in their 40s or 50s even, who played Mortal Kombat back in 92, 93, 94,
yep.
and sort of, you know, bring some excitement in that regard into their lives.
Yeah, yeah. One of my friends used to play on X Band in
Oh
America.
wow,
Yeah,
yep.
you know,
Yep.
doing that, and he still remembers the music. You know, the menu music and stuff like that. You know, and it's just like you know, that's so cool. You know, and he's like, that's it. I'm coming out of retirement. I'm gonna show these young people how to fight because Yeah, they had competitions back then, and he got up pretty high, which was really awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was really cool. I'm assuming, like, again, this is just direct comparison with your other collections. I'm assuming there'll be like the jukebox, in terms of like being able to go in and access like all the music from each game. Will that kind of thing be a?
Yeah, we're going to try to include as much of the music as possible. In what way we'll let people see as far as how it's
Yep,
presented.
yep, yep,
But yeah, we like to try to whenever we can include the music in an accessible way, and especially the arcade game music for sure.
yep,
We want to include, but we'll try to include as much as we can. And Yeah, there'll be a lot of features across the board. Story wise, trying to go and explore all the different characters that have been in Mortal Kombat and what their stories are and things like that. So
mm,
there's a lot of just behind the scenes content that we'll be digging into. And I think the closest thing I can say is like, yeah, if you haven't looked at Street Fighter 30th, kind of look at that. That
yep,
was the early lessons that we had as far as like how do we get all of this information and how do we tell a story to some
yep,
degree there. But now 7 years of experience have gone by, and how do we improve that and make that even more engaging,
yep.
things like that. So we're excited. We're excited.
Yeah, I can't wait. I think that might be all the questions. I mean, so obviously you know about War Gods,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I guess because that was always, I think to me that was the test bed of like MK4. Can can collections like this end up with like side adjacent fighters? Like, because I was watching
Mm.
I think a live stream of yours where something came up where you love Primal Rage.
Oh yeah, I do
So
love Primal
so
Rage.
Primal Rage is absolutely fantastic, right? So I
Yeah.
kind of think like can would it be something that you could ever add things like that to the collection, even though they're not Mortal Kombat games, or
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, it really depends on the situation and the scope of the game. Like if we're just trying to give an example of something, like if we're just doing War Gods, like getting War Gods arcade up and running and playing it, it's like it's a lot of work, and I guess we would have to figure out what the value proposition is for that. And it's like,
yep,
well, instead of doing that, could you take that work and that engineering time and improve some aspect of another version of Mortal Kombat or something? You know what I
yep,
mean? I'm just giving
yep,
a hypothetical situation.
yep,
So it's
yep,
always a lot of that juggling stuff. Like,
mm,
oh yes, we can double down on this feature, but oh, maybe we can add this across all the Mortal Kombat games. That would be really cool. Like, so it's just always this kind of juggling thing.
yep,
Um, as far as really what does it take to tell the best story possible? And that's how we kind of view it. And if
yep,
there's a situation where we need to be able to get another game up and running or include videos of that game, that sort of makes sense. But it's all in service of trying to tell that story. And
yep,
if it's important to the story to include X, Y, or Z, then we would
yep,
certainly try to include X, Y, or Z.
yep. Yeah, I know MK spawned a lot of like side project type fighters. We had everything from
Yeah.
Way the Warrior,
Hmm.
which I think Naughty Dog will not
Yeah.
recognize. Like they won't recognize it at all, man. It's like, no, I remember it was the first one, first game you
Yeah.
did. Things like Tattoo Assassins, The Pit.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like MK kind of really, yeah, like it spawned even within the fighting game of the subgenre of digital capture. There
Yes.
was ones that
Yes.
popped out, and then you obviously had things like Time Killers, Bloodstorm,
Oh,
that
there's a ton. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I love the fighting game genre anyway because I love the universes that have been created and the characters you can come across and stuff like that. But MK was, I mean, that was it. That's one thing I've sort of I always loved about John's vision with Mortal Kombat because I grew up watching like kung fu ninja movies, American Ninja,
Right.
Big Trouble in Little
Yes.
China.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I my son loves it. Like my son's 20 now. He loves Big Trouble in Little China. That's such a feel good.
Great. It's a great movie. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I wanna thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for doing this. This has been an absolute honor. It truly has.
Oh no, my pleasure. Like, thanks for reaching out. And like I said, I love to talk to as many people as possible, just to get people to understand Digital Eclipse and what we do, because it can
Yeah,
only help them understand the products that we're releasing out there in the world. Unfortunately, there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and
of
we
course.
have to work on the actual product. But
Yeah,
no, it's been a blast. It was nice meeting you
you too.
to discuss this, and definitely, I can say to fans, just stay, pay attention to the Digital Eclipse socials and moving up in the months ahead, and we'll have more to share with you in
Yep.
relation to other secrets about this collection and where we're going. And yeah, it'll be an exciting time. We have a lot to talk about still.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Oh, well, thank you so much again. And thanks you everyone for watching this video. I'll post all the links, obviously, to keep tabs on Stephen and
Mm-hmm.
harass him with all the secret. Because I've seen what you do when people ask questions. Oh, is it going to have training mode? And you just put a question mark, right? Like, so it's great trolling. Like, it's great, man. I love it. Very simple, very MK.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. Well, thanks again, dude. It was awesome, and I'll catch everyone later. See ya.
Thanks.